This episode is sponsored by Palace of the Golden Princess. More on that in a minute because I'm starting to remember, was I ever on other YouTube shows in the past?
I don't know, as far as like the actual rendering of it, I don't really have any complaints. It's all about the character design. And I think that's where most people are kind of complaining about, is like just the character design seems flawed. The Sonic has very iconically large eyes, and in this movie he's got tiny little like regular eyes.
That scene is where this movie went from being the absolute best instructional video ever made, and it went to a level where it is now competing with Lethal Weapon. Look, unlike Lethal Weapon, you know Mel Gibson's gonna be fine. These cops, they're gonna get stabbed in the dick. They're gonna get stabbed in the dick.
But wait, this isn't what you want to see, is it? Nah, you want to see this, right? Oh, come on, you really want to make me play this? Well, I'm gonna do it just for you, because I like you a lot. Now don't take that too serious. Here it goes. I'm turning on the power.
Whoa, how did I forget all that? All of us have forgotten that. Oh my God, speaking of forgotten past history, let's talk about the Sentry, because that's kind of his whole deal. Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. When it comes to superheroes, Superman was certainly one of the first and definitely the most successful. So perhaps it's only natural that over time, a lot of writers and artists would take that idea of a supremely powerful hero, an alien that passes for human, and do a twist on his personality or his powers. I'm talking about characters like Hyperion, Icon, Samaritan, Supreme, Omni-Man, Homelander. These are all examples of a superhero that takes the idea of an alien, or at least an outsider, with super strength and flight powers. One of the most prominent for Marvel is the Sentry, who of course will now be appearing in the Thunderbolts movie. So I figured this is the perfect time to talk about a character that I really admire his first series. It presents a superhero with some deeply flawed elements, some severe mental issues. So today I want to talk about how incredible the first series was, then how Marvel made some big changes to the character. I want to talk about what the original writer and artist Paul Jenkins and Lee brought to the character, and then we are going to talk about the absolutely fascinating story of how Marvel decided to perpetuate a hoax in part of its marketing campaign of getting this new character out to the readers, and that hoax involved roping in Wizard, the Guide to Comics, ostensibly a journalistic magazine about comic books, but yeah, they perpetuated a hoax on its audience. So without any further ado, let's get into the Sentry. The Sentry debuted in Marvel Comics in 2000 with a 5-issue miniseries, followed by 4 one-shots where he teamed up with prominent Marvel heroes, and wrapped up his story with a final one-shot titled The Sentry vs. the Void. This was part of the Marvel Knights imprint, which represented a big comeback for Marvel. After losing so many of their top artists to Image in the early 90s, Marvel declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy at the very end of 1996 and needed to turn things around. Marvel ended up outsourcing several of their characters to Event Comics, headed by Jimmy Palmiotti and Joe Quesada. They would hire creative teams to work on characters like Daredevil and Black Panther and guide the editorial, but the characters still existed within the mainstream Marvel continuity. Marvel Knights was a big success, and I would call the Sentry part of that second wave of titles that were part of the Marvel Knights imprint. I'm going to now break down a little bit of Sentry's origin, and it does involve some spoilers. So if you don't want to know about his origin and a little bit of a twist to his story, you can jump to this time code, and that's where I'm just going to talk more about what writer Paul Jenkins brought to the table with this, and then talk about how there was a bit of a retcon in Marvel. But for now, let's talk about the original Sentry miniseries. The Sentry introduces Bob Reynolds, a middle-aged, seemingly ordinary man who one day begins to remember that he was once the Sentry, a superhero completely forgotten by everyone else in the world, who had, quote, the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns, end quote. Along with this memory comes a horrifying realization. His arch nemesis, the Void, is returning, and no one remembers either of them. The last time the Void attacked, it left millions dead and required all the Marvel heroes standing together to turn him away. Bob's reemergence as the Sentry forces him to confront his forgotten past in fits and starts, while reaching out to other Marvel heroes, most importantly, Mr. Fantastic and the Hulk, to help him piece together his life. Flashbacks take place with key Marvel heroes like Spider-Man and the X-Men, and artist Jay Lee changes his style to reflect how the art may have looked if the Sentry had actually been published in previous decades by Marvel Comics. As each hero slowly begins to remember the Sentry and the Void, it raises a mystery. Why did the world forget them in the first place? Ultimately, it's revealed that the Sentry and the Void are two sides of the same person. The Void is a dark manifestation of Bob's psyche and powers. To save the world, the heroes orchestrated a mass memory wipe, including Bob's, to erase the Sentry and with him, the Void, from history. The story uses the well-known heroes and world of Marvel history to lend weight to the themes it explores, such as legacy and forgotten history. The themes include mental illness, and specifically, Bob Reynolds is coded as having schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder. Another key theme is the duality of heroism and self-destruction. Also woven into the story is addiction. Bob knows that when he becomes the Sentry, he also brings forth the Void, but he can't easily stop being a superhero. He wants it. Importantly, he takes a drug to become the Sentry. It's a variation on the super soldier formula that created Captain America. I believe that that first miniseries is fantastic. You've got the 5-issue miniseries of the Sentry. You can technically skip the 4-issue one-shots where he's teaming up with other superheroes. It adds weight and dimension to Bob's backstory, but it doesn't necessarily progress the story. Although the final one-shot, the Sentry versus the Void, is essential, and it tells a complete story. It's the rise and fall again of a superhero. I think it's brilliant, just my opinion, but I think that Paul Jenkins did some brilliant stuff here with the writing, told in a slightly non-linear fashion as well. Let me talk a little bit about Paul Jenkins. Paul Jenkins is a British comic writer known for his thoughtful character work and emotionally resonant storytelling. Before the Sentry with artist Jay Lee, Jenkins had built a solid career in comics throughout the 1990s, establishing himself at both Marvel and DC with a reputation for humanizing even the most fantastical characters. His work in comics started in the late 80s at Mirage Studios, where he worked on the publishing and editing side of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It gave Jenkins a deep understanding of the editorial side of comics, how a pitch gets developed, what works well in comics, and a chance to develop his own storytelling skills. Jenkins' breakout came as a writer on DC's Vertigo title Hellblazer, writing the character of John Constantine after a very successful run by Garth Ennis. Jenkins emerged from relative obscurity to writing a well-known title from 94 through 97 and is noted for injecting introspection and moral ambiguity into John Constantine's character. In 1998, he transitioned to Marvel Comics with a pitch for Inhumans that was picked up by Quesada and Palmiotti for the Marvel Knights imprint. Along with artist Jay Lee, the title won an Eisner Award and set the tone for what the Sentry would offer: superhero action with an eye on the psychology of the superheroes themselves. I would argue that a through line across Paul Jenkins' work, and what makes his writing style unique, are 4 elements. Psychological depth, peeling back layers of superhero personalities to look at their emotional complexities. putting character development first, which grounded plots that were cosmic or supernatural. A literary approach with philosophical introspection of themes like identity and redemption. And his efforts to write to the artist's strengths. For instance, both Inhumans and the Sentry lean into Jay Lee's hallmarks of moody and expressive art with deep shadows and negative space that highlight the characters within a larger world. Lee learns into atmosphere and emotion, often crafting scenes that feel more like dreamlike tableaus than action panels. His backgrounds tend to be minimalist or abstract, allowing figures to stand out in surreal, often somber environments. By the time Jenkins wrote The Sentry, he was well positioned to deconstruct superhero archetypes. He was using his Vertigo experience, using a more literary style, to write the iconic superheroes of Marvel Comics. And The Sentry gives us something that's both deeply nostalgic and completely original. Those two tones together, in my opinion, are what makes The Sentry so special. And that originality is kind of a rare example ever since 2000 of Marvel creating a new superhero. Ever since the rise of creator-owned comics, thanks to publishers like Image, many writers will hold on to their best ideas rather than give them to big companies like Marvel and DC. As in, many of Marvel's newer characters are new versions of existing ones or derivative of them, like the Sam Alexander version of Nova, or Flash Thompson becoming Agent Venom. Completely original characters, aside from the Sentry, would include the Runaways, Blue Marvel, Miss America, and Mosaic. You could also argue for Kamala Khan, since she was a new character with new powers who just took a name associated with her personal hero instead of being something like a sidekick or someone who got the same powers as an existing hero. But either way, Sentry is in rarefied company. The Sentry's story by Paul Jenkins fits within Marvel Comics, but it also felt complete. Nevertheless, Sentry was integrated into Marvel Comics in an ongoing capacity in the pages of The New Avengers, where writer Brian Michael Bendis tweaked and retconned some of the Sentry. That story featured Sentry having voluntarily locked himself in supervillain prison because he claimed to have killed his wife. Eventually, the heroes show Sentry that his wife is still very much alive, and that writer Paul Jenkins exists within the Marvel Universe. Somehow, Sentry had telepathically shared what he thought his story was with Jenkins, who then made the Sentry comics. But the New Avengers story then reveals that supervillain Mastermind had changed Sentry's memories, and that he and his enemy the Void are both created from Bob Reynolds, but they can exist independently. I like the idea of a powerful superhero with complex mental issues that he has to overcome, something internal driving that conflict. And I just find it a little convenient that when there was this bit of a retcon, now the Sentry can just exist within Marvel continuity and they don't always have to worry about the Void. I think that reduces some of the complexities of the character from the original miniseries. Just my opinion, of course. But now it's time to talk about the fascinating marketing behind introducing this new superhero. And as long as I'm talking about marketing, let's talk about this episode's sponsor, Palace of the Golden Princess Issue 2. And as you can see, while this is a crowdfunding campaign, Issue 2 with different covers, it's already in my hand. Palace of the Golden Princess by Pocket Jacks Comics is based on the first Dungeons & Dragons campaign written by a woman, Jean Wells. But then publisher TSR didn't use it because it was sexy, and they somehow thought that wouldn't appeal to their gaming audience. Now, writer Preston Poulter and artists Ediano Silva and Yag Kumar continue the story of Gretchen the Knight on a quest for her evil queen, trying to navigate the world and stay true to her morals. Palace of the Golden Princess Issue 2 features all sorts of cool fantasy action, all sorts of interesting creatures, quests, knights, all that stuff that you like. But the part that I personally like the most is that it features heroes with a moral core that are trying to navigate a world where the figures in power, like the Queen of the Realm or a new sorcerer that they meet, are actually quite corrupt. And, you know, how do you keep true to your morals when the people in power are so broken? So, you know, even though it's fantastical, I think that it covers some topics, some issues that are real to us. There are also some great bonuses that you can get, you know, some perks. Obviously, there's several different covers. You can do things like get a campaign set in this world. I think it's a great campaign. It is running through Thursday, May 15th. So act now. The link is in the description below. Thank you so much to Pocket Jacks Comics for sponsoring this episode. Now let's talk about the marketing of the Sentry. No discussion about the Sentry would really be complete without talking about the marketing campaign behind introducing this character. To do that, there's not lots of images that I could use, so I'm going to be talking to you in a more casual storytime style from this point forward, and I'm going to be quoting liberally from the blog of artist and writer Rick Veitch, who had a key role in this. He talked about it back in 2009 on his official website. That's no longer up on his website now, but you can use the Wayback Machine to find it. And if you want to know more about Rick Veitch, creator I really like, I'll point you to videos I've already created on this channel about Brat Pack and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Let's hear what Rick had to say. Veitch writes, Paul Jenkins and I were old buds, having met while he was at Mirage Studios. We worked closely together on Brat Pack and the Max Immortal at Tundra. Paul was focused mostly on production and editing back in those days, but clearly had potential as a writer. He and I had often discussed the story he wanted to develop concerning an over-the-hill guy struggling with addiction who had a tight relationship with his dog. Paul was trying to come up with a way to show the character's addiction problem as a manifestation of the unconscious. At one point, if I remember correctly, Paul pitched a horror version of this plot to Steve Bissette for Taboo, although nothing came of it. It was in the late 1990s that Paul and I came together to try and develop it as a superhero pitch for Marvel. At the time, Paul and I came together to work on the Sentry concept. Marvel Comics was a financial mess. Sales were lousy with the exception of the Marvel Knights line, a side imprint produced outside of the Marvel offices by Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti. Paul had a good connection to Quesada, and the plan was to create a brand new character we would pitch to Joe and Jimmy for the Marvel Knights line. Paul saw the character as a Guardian type with a watchtower. We tossed around possible names and initially hit on the Centurion, which seemed a bit clunky. It was Paul who boiled Centurion down to Sentry, which sounded so good we couldn't believe it wasn't already taken. What I brought to the table was the retro angle. I'd been involved in two major retro projects, 1963 and Supreme, in which Alan Moore and I had developed a sort of deadpan approach to the genre. Then and now, most retro stories you see tend to be over-exaggerated. The dumbness is caricatured, played for laughs in both the writing and the art. Alan and I believed such an approach was to be avoided. It was this close as you can get to it mimicry approach that I wanted to bring to the Sentry, creating a false history of the character with versions going back to timely comics in the 1940s. Paul liked the idea, but wondered how we could explain the character's absence in 60 years of company continuity. That's when the light bulb went on. I'm quite sure it was my suggestion that something so horrible happened to the Sentry that all memory of the event and Sentry himself had to be wiped out, probably by some Marvel character on the scale of the Watcher. Right there, Paul and I knew we had it. Sentry's quest for a return of his memories and powers, a solution for his absence in Marvel continuity, and motivation for an attack by his own unconscious. Rick Veitch wrote that they riffed on this idea of a Marvel character that had been forgotten, and they slowly came up with this meta angle of, oh, maybe we could also talk about how everybody in the real world also forgot about this pitch for the Sentry. And so, yeah, they came up together with the idea for both the character and the pitch. Rick Veitch is not officially credited as a creator of the Sentry, but he absolutely is one. Let's talk more about what Rick Veitch wrote. Veitch continues to write about how Paul Jenkins got the book approved, writing, quote, "Paul set up a meeting with Quesada and took the train down to the city. I waited for Paul's call, letting me know that it was a go or a dud. Now, anyone who knows Paul Jenkins knows he can be direct and to the point. And when he called to let me know how the Sentry meeting had gone with Joe Quesada, he immediately told me that he was doing the book with Jay Lee. This set me back on my heels a little bit. I mean, you hear about concepts and storylines for existing characters being hijacked by publishers and editors all the time, but not so a completely original concept. Thing is, bringing in Jay made a lot of sense. He and Paul had done a corker of a job on an Inhumans miniseries, which had even won an Eisner. And I couldn't fault a publisher, Star for Hits, with maximizing box office appeal, even if it meant me being thrown under a bus. I had plenty of other projects to keep me going, and more importantly, Paul had been there for me more than once back at Tundra, so I didn't make a stink. So now it was time for Marvel to pitch this idea to comics readers, you know, get the word out, get some buzz going, get that marketing engine going. And to do that, they decided to perpetuate a hoax on the readership, claiming that the idea had been created back in the Silver Age of comics and had been forgotten. To do that, they roped in Wizard, the Guide to Comics. Now, ostensibly, that is a journalistic magazine devoted to giving you the news and interviews on comics, but yeah, they all work together to trick the reading public. It started with Marvel publishing a notice in the letters page of Daredevil issue 9 from the summer of 1999, saying that Silver Age employee Artie Rosen was in bad health, and their thoughts were with him. Except there was never any Artie Rosen. The name was a mashup of two letterers that worked for Marvel, Artie Simic and Sam Rosen. Next, Marvel had Wizard publish an obituary for the non-existent creator in their April 2000 issue, where they said that Artie Rosen had passed away, and they included a kind word from Stan Lee. The next month, in issue 104 of Wizard, Wizard included a news item that an old piece of art featuring a character co-created by Stan Lee and Artie Rosen may have been found. And then the next month, Wizard included a third, larger, supposed news story. They wrote that when Artie Rosen passed away, his wife uncovered unpublished artwork, including his designs for a character he and Stan Lee co-created, the Sentry, who was meant to have been published before Fantastic Four #1. Nowhere in the news article was there a hint that this was a fictional story. Instead, it said that Marvel was jumping on the idea with a new series based on the idea by Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee. Marvel also continued the hoax by including interviews with Stan Lee in the back pages of the Sentry, asking him about the character's creation and Artie Rosen's work. In reality, the sketches of the Sentry were done by John Romita Sr. Stan Lee had not created the character, although Jenkins did explain that Stan asked him what the character's weakness or failing was, and he helped develop the idea of Bob Reynolds being agoraphobic, afraid to go outside. Wizard eventually wrote a news item months later in issue 116 explaining who was involved in the hoax and the idea to make it seem like the Sentry had been forgotten in real life, just like he'd been forgotten within the continuity of Marvel Comics by its superheroes. For more details on both the pitch and the hoax, there's a wonderful thread compiled by user Iceman Fanatic on the A Better Place message boards, and I'll include a link to that in the description. Ultimately, it seems Joe Quesada was the biggest fan of the hoax idea, and he was the one that pushed that forward. He had the connections with Wizard back then. He was close with them, doing interviews, doing variant covers, things like that. And you know, it worked. Wizard had a publication run of over 100,000 copies a month. It reached a lot of people. It probably helped the Sentry get noticed. So, you know, that's fine. It's just that I remember reading issue 116 where they revealed that it was all a hoax, and I felt kind of betrayed. I mean, I knew that Wizard had tongue-in-cheek. You know, they were kind of funny and silly and stuff, but I still thought that their news articles and their interviews were real, and I felt like this crossed the line. Maybe I'm overreacting. I'd love to hear your responses in the comments below. Am I reacting? Was this all in good fun? Or did they have a certain amount of journalistic responsibility? Because ultimately, I applaud the originality of the marketing, and I wouldn't have had an issue if it was just published in the pages of Marvel. That's Marvel just being Marvel, promoting their idea in a unique, clever way. That I don't have an issue with. And I love the original miniseries. I strongly recommend that first 5 issues, and definitely the final one-shot, The Sentry versus the Void. Utterly original concept, excellent execution, great, great character. Marvel is lucky to have them. Love to hear your opinions below. Thank you again to the sponsor of this episode, Pocket Jacks Comics, with Palace of the Golden Princess issue 2 up on Kickstarter now. Thank you very much, folks. I will see you soon, and until then, you know what to do. Keep reading comics. Bye. Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching this episode. It means a lot to me. It was really fun to put together. I'm sorry that it ended up taking a little while. I'll explain. There are sort of 2 things behind the scenes that delayed me a little, just so that you've got an idea of where things are at. I switched my positions at work, so I'm going through some training, and it means that like while I'm in training, I have less control of my schedule. It's a little more hours than I used to work. Once I'm out of that training, I should actually have more hours to work on the show. But that's one thing. And second, I've got an issue with my shoulder. It feels like frozen shoulder, if you want to look that up. And it just means that like while I'm writing and editing, it creates a lot of intense pain, and I have to take a break or I'll just fall over and die. So those are 2 things that are delaying me slightly. I'm sorry, I wish I could get things to you faster, but I've already got a ton of great ideas for episodes lined up, and yeah, I'm recording this before the Thunderbolts comes out in the hopes that, hey, maybe some people will be curious about the Sentry and it'll get a few more clicks on the video. It's a game you play. I hope the movie's good. It looks interesting. Dare I hope that Marvel is sort of coming back with some really good movies? I don't know. I am excited for this one in Fantastic Four, but we shall see. Thank you very much for your support. Folks on Patreon at the $2 and above level now have the ability every month to vote on a topic and get an exclusive video. So just want you to know that. Appreciate your support. Talk to you soon. Bye.